Welcome to Enver Narrates. Immerse yourself in the timeless world of classic literature. Subscribe to join our journey through stories. Chapter 1. The theme of the mid-dark spruce forest frowned on either side the frozen waterway. The trees had been stripped by a recent wind of their white covering of frost, and they seemed to lean toward each other, black and ominous, in the fading light. A vast silence reigned over the land. The land itself was a desolation, lifeless, without movement, so lone and cold that the spirit of it was not even that of sadness. There was a hint in it of laughter, but of a laughter more terrible than any sadness, a laughter that was mirthless as the smile of the Sphinx, a laughter cold as the frost and partaking of the grimness of infallibility. It was the masterful and incommunicable wisdom of eternity, laughing at the futility of life and the effort of life. It was the wild, the savage, frozen-hearted Northland wild. But there was life, abroad in the land and defiant. Down the frozen waterway toiled a string of wolfish dogs. Their bristly fur was rimed with frost. Their breath froze in the air as it left their mouths, spouting forth in spumes of vapor that settled upon the hair of their bodies and formed into crystals of frost. Leather harness arrayed the dogs, and leather traces attached them to a sled which dragged along behind. The sled was without runners. It was made of stout birch bark, and its full surface rested on the snow. The front end of the sled was turned up like a scroll, in order to make it rise over the soft undulations of snow that froze into waves. On the sled, securely lashed, was a long and narrow oblong box. There were other things on the sled: blankets, an axe, a coffee pot, and frying pan, but prominent, occupying most of the space, was the long and narrow oblong box. In advance of the dogs, on white snowshoes, toiled a man. At the rear of the sled toiled a second man. On the sled, in the box, lay a third man whose toil was over. A man whom the wild had conquered and beaten down until he would never move nor struggle again. It is not the way of the wild to like movement. Life is an offense to it, for life is movement, and the wild aims always to destroy movement. It freezes the water to prevent it from running to the sea. It drives the sap out of the trees till they are frozen to their mighty hearts. And most ferociously and terribly of all does the wild harry and crush into submission man who is the most restless of life, ever in revolt against the dictum that all movement must eventually come to a halt. But at front and rear, unawed and undaunted, toiled the two men who were not yet dead. Their bodies were clad in furs and soft tanned leather. Eyelashes and cheeks and lips were so coated with the crystals from their frozen breath that their faces were not discernible. This gave them the seeming of ghost maskers, undertakers, in a spectral world at the funeral of some ghost. But under it all they were men, penetrating the land of desolation and mockery and silence, puny adventurers bent on colossal adventure, pitting themselves against the might of a world as remote and alien and pulseless as the abysses of space. They traveled on without speech, saving their breath for the work of their bodies. On every side was the silence, pressing upon them with a tangible presence. It affected their minds as the many atmospheres of deep water affect the body of the diver. It crushed them with the weight of unending vastness and unalterable decree. It heaped them into the remotest recesses of their own minds, pressing out of them like juice from the grape all the false ardors and ferocities and self-values of the human spirit, until they perceived themselves finite and small, specks and motes, moving with weak cunning and little wisdom amidst the play and interplay of the great blind elements and forces. An hour went by, and a second hour. The pale light of the short, sunless day was beginning to fade when a faint, far cry arose on the still air. It soared up with a quick ascent until it reached a scarcely held note of interrogation and died away. It might have been a lost soul wailing had it not been invested with a certain sad fierceness and hungry eagerness. The front man turned his head until his eyes met the eyes of the man behind, and then, across the narrow oblong box, each nodded to the other. A second cry rose up, piercing the silence with needle sharpness. Both men located the sound. It was to the rear, somewhere in the snow expanse they had just traversed. A third and answering cry arose, also to the rear and to the left of the second cry. "They're after us, Bill," said the man at the front. His voice sounded hollow and unearthly, and he spoke with an effort. "Meat is scarce," answered his companion. "I ain't seen a rabbit sign for days." Thenceforth they spoke no more, though their ears were keen for the hunting cries that continued to rise behind them. At the fall of darkness they swung the dogs into a cluster of spruce trees on the edge of the waterway and made a camp. The coffin, at the side of the fire, served for seat and table. The wolf dogs, clustered on the far side of the fire from the men, snarled and quarreled among themselves, but evinced no inclination to stray off into the darkness. "Seems to me, Henry, they're staying remarkable close to camp," Bill commented. Henry, squatting over the fire and thawing a chunk of ice for their coffee, nodded. He did not speak until he had taken his seat on the coffin and begun to eat. "They know where their hides is safe," he said. "They'd sooner eat food than be food. They're pretty wise, them dogs." Bill shook his head. "Oh, I don't know." His companion looked at him curiously. "First time I ever heard you say anything about their not being wise." "Henry," said the other, munching with deliberation the beans he was eating, "did you happen to notice the way them dogs kicked up when I was a-feeding 'em?" "They did cut up more than usual," Henry acknowledged. "How many dogs we got, Henry?" "6. "Well, Henry," Bill stopped for a moment, in order that his words might gain greater significance. "As I was saying, Henry, we've got 6 dogs. I took 6 fish out of the bag. I gave 1 fish to each dog, and Henry, I was 1 fish short. You miscounted. We've got 6 dogs." The other reiterated dispassionately. "I took out 6 fish. 1 ear didn't get no fish. I went back to the bag and got. I am his fish." "We've only got 6 dogs," Henry said. "Henry," Bill went on, "I won't say they was all dogs, but there was 7 of 'em that got fish." Henry stopped eating to glance across the fire and count the dogs. "There's only 6 now," he said. "I saw the other one run off across the fire." "Snow," Bill announced with cool positiveness. "I saw 7. Henry looked at him commiseratingly and said, "I'll be almighty glad when this trip's over." "What do you mean by that?" Bill demanded. "I mean that this load of ours is getting on your nerves and that you're beginning to see things." "I thought of that," Bill answered gravely. "And so when I saw it run off across the snow, I looked at the marks it made. And then I counted the dogs. There were still 6 of them. The marks is there in the snow now. Do you want to look at them?" "I'll show 'em to you." Henry did not reply, but chewed on in silence until the meal finished. He sucked Mary's breath with a cup of coffee. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and said, "Then you're thinking as it was." A long wailing cry, low-pitched and sad, from somewhere in the darkness, checked his voice. He paused to listen to it, then completed his sentence with a wave of his hand toward the sound of the cry. "One of them?" Bill nodded. "I'd a blame sight sooner think that than anything else. You noticed the row the dogs made. Cry after cry, and answering cries, were turning the silence into a bedlam. From every side the signals came. The dogs betrayed their fear by clustering together and closing in until they were almost in the fire. One of them, in his eagerness to get near, singed his coat, and the smell of burning hair was in the air. This caused the circle of eyes to shift and move for a moment, and even to recede a short distance, but as the dogs settled down, the circle of eyes also settled down. "It's a pity, Henry, that we're low on ammunition." Bill had finished his pipe and was helping his companion spread the bed of fur and blanket upon the spruce boughs which he had laid over the snow before supper. Henry grunted and started to unlace his moccasins. "How many rounds did you say you had left?" "3, was the answer. "And I wished it was 300. Then I'd show 'em what for, damn 'em." He shook his fist angrily at the gleaming eyes and thoughtfully placed his moccasins before the fire. "And I wish this cold snap'd break," he continued. "It's been 50 below for 2 weeks now. And I wished I'd never started on this trip, Henry. I don't like the looks of it. I don't feel right, somehow. And while I'm wishing, I wish the trip was over and done with, and you and me a-sittin' by the fire at Fort McGurry just about now and playing cribbage. That's what I wished. That's what I wished."